Nancy Whitlow contacted the police 17 times on my RV parked in my own driveway within just 3 weeks. She even assessed the noise level with her phone app at 2 a.m., even though the RV had been off since 8 p.m. Nancy, however, was unaware that I also kept records, which would eventually enable me to create something she would have to view daily for the rest of her wretched existence. Comment with your city, since this narrative shows that occasionally the best form of retribution is entirely legal. Let me start from the beginning backwards. Cal Harrington is my name. 6 months ago, following the completion of my divorce, I felt I had discovered heaven. I needed a calm beginning someplace. On paper, Pine Valley Estates appeared ideal, a peaceful community with well-kept houses, tree-lined lanes, and fair homeowner association rates. 3 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, and most importantly, a large concrete driveway that would have readily fit my 32-foot Winnebago RV, were all what I wanted in a house. I had worked hard to afford that RV, and weekend camping trips were my main source of sanity following the divorce. The first several weeks were happy. As I arrived and went, my neighbors waved from their immaculate lawns, seeming to be cordial enough. Working from home as a computer systems consultant, I developed a schedule and then started traveling Friday afternoon for experiences in state parks and campgrounds. Life seemed nice once more. I should have realized it was too wonderful to last as it was when meeting Nancy Whitlow, the self-appointed queen of Pine Valley Estates and the most unhappy human being I have ever come across. I initially set eyes on her Friday evening in early September. Having just arrived in my driveway with the RV, I intended to stock goods for a weekend mountain excursion. I turned off the engine and descended to find a woman in her late 30s strolling across my lawn like she owned the place while I was backing the rig into position and heard this loud voice behind me yelling, "Excuse me, excuse me." She was wearing a faded flower print dress that screamed discount shop clearance rack and had cheap blonde hair that looked like it came from a box. The large canvas bag draped across her shoulder seemed to be loaded with different measuring tools and folders, and the clipboard she held in her hands like a weapon truly drew my eye. Announcing herself as the Pine Valley Homeowners Association president, "I'm Nancy Whitlow," she positioned herself between my front door and as intended to obstruct my escape. She pointed sharply at my RV, and that is completely unacceptable. I stood there for a second, really perplexed as my RV was parked totally on my own land, without blocking any walkways or streets. "I apologize. Is there a problem?" I asked gently. Nancy responded, pulling out her phone and snapping pictures from several angles. "The problem is that recreational RVs harm the aesthetic integrity of our area." I said that while there were limits on permanently storing RVs, there was nothing banning temporary parking for loading and unloading. I had carefully gone over the homeowner association paperwork before buying the house. Nancy started rumbling through her purse, bringing out a measuring tape that appeared to have belonged in a museum, and her cheeks became an amazing shade of crimson. She mumbled, "We'll see about that," extending the tape across my RV while I marveled. She took 47 pictures. Yes, I counted, and measured from 3 different angles, spending almost 20 minutes photographing every feature of my car as if she were investigating a crime scene. Though something in Nancy's eyes told me this was deadly serious to her, the entire performance was so ridiculous I almost laughed. There was a frantic intensity there, like she had at last discovered her calling in pestering me about my RV. Nancy marched back to the pavement and turned around for one last shout when her documentation effort was over. "Mr. Harrington, you will soon be hearing from the Homeowners Association." She added, "This is only the beginning." Those last words were uttered with such poison that I felt a chill run down my spine. Indeed, under my windshield wiper, I discovered an official violation letter tucked under the next morning. The notice requested that my ugly recreational vehicle be taken off the property right away and was printed in Comic Sans typeface with multiple clear mistakes. Someone had penned in purple ink at the bottom, "This is just the beginning." I stood there clutching this absurd note, wondering just what exactly I'd gotten myself into by moving to Pine Valley Estates. Researching every phrase and part of the Pine Valley Estates Homeowner Association contract, I spent most of that weekend. What I found was both equally amazing and infuriating. Written 15 years ago, the original covenant included precisely 3 sentences on recreational vehicles. They couldn't be used as permanent homes, they couldn't be parked permanently in driveways, and they couldn't cause traffic congestion. Nothing regarding temporary parking for loading and unloading, nothing about design criteria, nothing that would forbid exactly what I was doing. Nancy had been busy, nevertheless, over the years. Apparently hidden in past 3-year meeting minutes were hundreds of explanations and interpretations Nancy had forced through, usually with hardly a quorum present. She had basically altered the guidelines to provide her absolute control over every facet of neighborhood existence. I was her last target. The woman had turned a basic homeowners association into her personal fiefdom. Monday morning I was sipping coffee and organizing my calendar when I heard the clear sound of someone beating on my front door. I could see Nancy standing on my porch with what looked to be a police officer peephole-wise. As I answered the door, my heart dropped to discover Deputy Brad Whitman, a 40-year-old man obviously wishing he was somewhere else. "Sir, we have a complaint about an illegal commercial vehicle parked in a residential area," he remarked, glancing regretfully at Nancy, who was almost vibrating with enthusiasm behind him. Calmly, I explained the circumstances, showed Deputy Whitman her RV registration, insurance certificates, and personal use records. Everything was absolutely legal and appropriately recorded. After touring my RV, the officer noted something and came back looking sympathetically. "Ma'am," he continued to Nancy, "this is a privately owned recreational vehicle, correctly registered for personal use." Nancy's face changed in hue many times before settling on a startling shade of purple. "There is no infringement here." "But it's commercial size," she said, sputtering. Deputy Whitman gently said that vehicle size by itself did not define commercial status and that unless there was proof of company activity, there was nothing criminal happening, therefore damaging our property values. Nancy lingered in my driveway for some minutes gazing at my RV like it had personally offended her family after the officer left. She then got out her phone and began phoning. Though I couldn't hear everything, I began to notice minute changes in the neighborhood dynamics when I caught terms like uncooperative neighbor, property value destruction, and we need to take action within hours. Those few neighbors who had waved before turned aside when they spotted me. Someone posted a passive-aggressive note regarding community standards on my windshield. When the woman across the street spotted me approaching, she really crossed to the opposite sidewalk. Nancy was clearly running a full-scale gossip campaign, depicting me as some sort of neighborhood threat single-handed demolishing Pine Valley estates. She had positioned herself as the valiant guardian of neighborhood values, opposing the thoughtless outsider who dared to park his massive RV where good people may have to view it. The campaign turned out rather successfully. I felt like an outcast in my own community a week later. Nancy, though, was not happy to merely discredit me by poisoning the neighbors. She raised to what I could only call psychological warfare. She would leave her residence with her clipboard every morning at precisely 7 a.m. and do what she termed neighborhood quality inspections. This included strolling slowly by my house, snapping pictures of my RV from every possible angle, and jotting notes on her clipboard with too great emphasis. She tracked which way my RV was pointing, noted tire locations, and even began timing my gear loading or unloading times. Although the entire act was obviously meant to scare me, it had an unexpected humorous result. Nancy seemed to have designated herself as the unofficial RV surveillance specialist for the area, and she accepted the position with the type of relentless commitment normally reserved for rocket engineers or brain surgeons. She purchased a noise measuring software for her phone, but she obviously didn't know how to use it correctly since she kept receiving erratic readings from leaves rustling in the breeze and birds tweeting. When my friend Megan Blake, a real estate attorney, visited that weekend, she identified Nancy right away. "Oh my God, Cal, I know exactly who that is," she said following my account of events. 2 years ago, Nancy was in the news for pestering Riverside Hills neighbors and was expelled from her homeowners association for focusing on a family with a boat. This seems to be her thing. She enters into a community, gets herself elected to the HOA, then chooses one person to harass until either she gets kicked out personally or they move away. This knowledge was shocking and horrifying since it indicated Nancy was actually engaged in a hobby, not merely going through a difficult period or a terrible week. I knew I had to decide as I watched Nancy arrange what looked to be a tripod for better surveillance angles. I could figure out how to fight back or let this lady drive me from my house. Nancy had all the institutional power. She was the HOA president, had friends among the neighbors, and was obviously ready to commit endless time and effort to make my life miserable. I needed a plan that would fit her system, something she wouldn't see until it was too late. That evening, I decided something that would fundamentally alter everything. I began meticulously documenting every contact with Nancy, every infraction notice, every harassment incident. I recorded her trespassing, her methods of intimidation, and her progressively insane behavior. Though I wasn't sure exactly how I would use this material, I sensed it will be useful finally. I knew I was more than ready to comply if Nancy wanted to play the long game as I watched her arrange a camera system squarely on my driveway. The next week, Nancy's harassment campaign started a new phase when she reportedly felt one police call per incident was not nearly enough. Deputy Whitman began showing up at my house more and more, each time looking more worn out and guilty. He had said wearily, then spent 5 minutes carefully recording that my RV had been silent for hours. Noise pollution complaint, he said. Report of oil stains on the driveway. Then a careful check showed out that my pavement was really cleaner than most of my neighbors. Traffic obstruction allegation, which needed him to calculate the distance between my RV and the street, verifying what anyone with eyes could see. There was absolutely no blockage at all. Deputy Whitman had been 6 times to my residence by Thursday of that week. With each visit, his coffee cup had gotten ever bigger, and he had begun carrying what looked to be a whole thermos of espresso. During visit number 5, he added, "Look, Mr. Harrington, I want you to know that these complaints are unique. Over 15 years on the force, I have never seen this degree of attention paid to one neighbor's properly parked car." He looked around nervously and then lowered his voice. "You might want to start recording these exchanges, between you and me." Deputy Whitman was reassured by me that I was in fact maintaining thorough records including timestamps, pictures, and his official reports, not normal level of harassment. This seemed to clear him really significantly. He remarked, emptying his coffee cup, "Good, because if this continues much longer, those records might become very important." I saw Nancy staring from her front window with binoculars as he left. The woman had upgraded to military-grade neighborhood monitoring after apparently deciding that regular surveillance was inadequate. Friday afternoon, the escalation I had been fearing arrived when I got word of an emergency homeowners association meeting set for Tuesday night. The program included just one item: debate and voting on suggested rules on leisure vehicles. Although Nancy was trying to use the democratic process to justify her personal grudge against my RV, I knew there was little I could do except show up and pray for the best. The meeting took place in the community center, a plain beige structure that aptly reflected Nancy's preferred soul-crushing look. Arriving, I was shocked to find around 30 individuals in attendance, apparently unheard of for Pine Valley Estates homeowners meetings. Nancy had obviously been phoning in favors, working the phones, and spreading panic over the alleged threat to the very survival of our area from the recreational vehicle situation. Nancy had been ready for this conference, much as she would have been defending her doctoral thesis. She had made a PowerPoint presentation, posters with charts, pictures of my RV from every perspective, and even produced her case was straightforward but compelling. If quick action was not taken, Pine Valley Estates would become a trailer park, property values would fall, and RVs were the entrance to neighborhood decline. Clearly embracing Nancy's apocalyptic picture of RV-induced social breakdown, the throng moaned anxiously. When Nancy at last let us talk, I stood up to tell my side of the tale. My RV was legally parked, registered correctly, and utilized exactly as advised by the original Homeowners Association covenant, I said. I mentioned that several other neighbors had boats, trailers, and big vehicles that somehow went unnoticed by Nancy. I even volunteered to help the association create fair rules addressing justifiable issues while safeguarding property rights. But already the damage was done. Nancy had spent weeks contaminating the well, labeling me as a thoughtless outsider disrespecting community values. The overall recreational vehicle rules approved by a margin of 4 votes to 3 when the vote was called. The new regulations were shockingly exact. RVs could not be parked in driveways for more than 4 straight hours, nor exceed 25 feet in length, 6 feet 8 inches in height. They needed formal permission from the Homeowners Association for any overnight parking, could not have any outside storage spaces, and had to be white or beige in color. Sitting in the rear row observing Nancy celebrate her triumph with hardly subdued enthusiasm, I came to see that this had nothing to do with RVs. This was about authority and control, and Nancy had just shown that she was ready to change the guidelines of our whole society in order to win a personal grudge fight. The woman had convinced the neighbors to assist her in virtually banishing my particular RV while opening doors for everyone else's toys. For the entire conference, Frank Delaney, a 50-year-old weathered man who owned the land adjacent to our community, had remained silently seated in the corner. He seemed to know as people filed out. Quietly, he remarked, "That woman sought to acquire my land 3 times in the past 2 years, always offering well below market value, saying she wished to extend community control beyond the current bounds. He offered me his business card and left me with a clear idea that Frank Delaney would become a very significant ally in whatever came next. I advised her to get lost every time, but now I'm thinking if there could be another way to approach this. Arriving on Thursday morning, the fine notice, printed on official Pine Valley Estates letterhead, was personally delivered by Nancy herself. $500 daily, beginning immediately, for violation of the recently passed comprehensive recreational vehicle rules. I have 24 hours to comply or risk paying fines that would finally cause a lien against my house. Nancy clearly savored what she thought to be her moment of ultimate triumph as she stood on my front porch with just subdued enthusiasm. She added, pretending to be sympathetic, "I tried to warn you, Mr. Harrington, but you decided not to listen." She delivered me the warning with a flourish, then got out her phone to snap pictures of my non-compliant car for what she called enforcement documentation purposes. Now you would have to deal with the results of your activities. Measuring and photographing every feature as I watched her circle my RV like a shark, I felt something inside me crack. I had reached my breaking point as this was just bullying and had nothing to do with property prices or community standards. By Friday afternoon, I had been compelled to pay $200 a month for a 15-mile outside-of-town storage facility. Loading my RV onto a trailer and seeing it vanish down the road seemed like a capitulation I would never completely be able to recover from. With a notebook in hand and a tow vehicle pulling away, Nancy came out of her house noting what she considered compliance verification. She really waved at me as my RV disappeared around the bend, a gesture so smugly triumphant that I wanted to toss something. Nancy, though, was not happy to only triumph in the RV fight. Having tasted success, she instantly ascended to uncover fresh infractions to support her presence as Pine Valley's self-appointed enforcement agent. She began daily quality inspections of my property, recording everything from the length of my lawn to the count of delivery vehicles that passed by my house. She had written me up for too much commercial vehicle traffic within a week since I had 3 Amazon deliveries in 2 days and possible home business violation as she saw me working at my computer during what she deemed to be regular business hours. The last straw came from the home business charge. Apparently tracking my daily schedule, Nancy concluded that working from home as a computer consultant amounted to illicit commercial conduct. She complained to the police, the building inspector, the tax assessor's office, and somehow even managed to get the FBI intrigued in what she claimed to be suspicious activity involving significant quantities of computer equipment, all seeking to find whether my lawful work from home job violated some vague zoning rules. I suddenly found myself handling investigators from 4 separate agencies. 2 whole weeks of my life were devoured in research. I had to send tax returns, customer quotes, employment documents, and thorough descriptions of exactly what a computer systems consultant performs all day. Examining my home office, building officials made sure I wasn't running some sort of illegal server farm. Tax officials confirmed I was paying suitable business permits and accurately reporting my income. Though he properly recorded my computer configuration and verified that remote work was not a federal crime, the FBI agent who showed up appeared really perplexed about why he was there. Nancy kept her daily surveillance schedule through it all, photographing and measuring as she was preparing evidence for a Supreme Court case. She would sit for hours with her binoculars and notebook recording every visitor, every delivery that arrived, and every time I so much as opened my front door. She had put up a folding chair on her front lawn with a clear view of my house. The woman had turned neighborhood harassment into a full-time career. By now Deputy Whitman's coffee intake was shockingly high. He had upgraded to what seemed to be a whole pot of espresso, and his hands trembled slightly as he apologized for the 6th inquiry in 2 weeks. "Mr. Having spent 15 years working as a police officer," Harrington remarked, looking tensely at Nancy's house, "I have never seen anything like this. The woman phones us fresh, complaining every single day. Because you opened your curtains at 8 a.m., yesterday she reported you for unusual window behavior. Instead of 7:30, he stopped to sip coffee slowly. Although I'm not meant to mention this, you might want to think about legal action. This transcends typical neighbor conflict well beyond what is reasonable." The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon when I was seated by myself on my living room floor surrounded by legal documents and research materials under rain. I had missed 2 weeks of work defending myself against Nancy's invented accusations. Starting to wonder about my dependability, my clients were asking my anxiousness had gotten to the point where I was having difficulty sleeping, and I started avoiding my own front windows as I couldn't take Nancy running daily surveillance operations. Sitting there at Nancy's house staring at the rain-streaked windows, I really thought about giving up. Selling the house, cutting losses, and beginning over somewhere else felt like the logical reaction to this degree of harassment. Originally seeking peace and quiet, I had gone to Pine Valley Estates instead of launching psychological warfare with a crazed president of a homeowners organization. Nancy had probably won after all. Then, though, my phone rang and everything changed. Megan Blake, a friend of mine who is a lawyer, was phoning with what she described as a totally wild but potentially viable concept. Hope hit me as I listened to her describe the legal research she had been conducting on my behalf, something I hadn't felt in weeks. She added, "Cal, what if I told you there was a way to make Nancy regret ever messing with you instead of just rebuffing her? And supposing I told you it was quite legal?" My doorbell rang before I could respond. Frank Delaney was standing on my porch looking as though he had significant news to impart via the peephole. He came right to the point as I opened the door. "Having seen what that woman has been doing to you, I have decided. I would like to sell you my land. I am selling it. As long as it irritates Nancy Whitlow, you have my whole support." Standing there in my doorway, listening to Frank's offer while Megan described her legal strategy over the phone, I felt the first real excitement I had since moving to Pine Valley Estates. Nancy had spent months torturing my life using every institutional instrument at her disposal to harass and threaten me. She had one important error, though. She had never thought about what might happen if someone rebelled using the same mechanism she had been controlling all along. I knew the conflict was far from finished as I peered across the street at Nancy's house, clearly organizing her next harassing effort. Actually, it was just starting, and this time I was the one developing the guidelines. Though I had not realized I required it until that point, Frank Delaney's property was just what I needed. 5 acres of gently rolling terrain located next to Pine Valley Estates with big oak trees, a little creek, and most significantly, a clear view of Nancy Whitlow's kitchen window. Just a week ago, I had not seen the opportunities Frank was walking me around the site the next morning. Frank said as we stepped close to the brook, "The land has been in my family for 60 years. When Pine Valley Estates got built 15 years ago, I thought about developing it myself, but I was getting close to retirement and didn't want the hassle." He stopped to stare straight at Nancy's house. "But for 3 years straight, that woman has made my life terrible. She complains about my farming tools, reports me to the health department, seeks to have the county mandate me to erect costly fencing. I would be interested in finding a legal way to irritate her and earn some money." Megan showed there that afternoon carrying a briefcase full of research and the kind of enthusiastic attitude she often kept for especially fascinating legal difficulties. She replied, laying papers over Frank's kitchen table, "Cal, this is perfect. Frank's land entirely falls outside the boundaries of the Homeowners Association." Nancy picked out a folder and began outlining the options since she cannot control what occurs here any more than she can control what happens on the moon. As we spoke, I grew more and more thrilled. Perfect for a recreational vehicle park with easy access to the main road, current utility connections, and adequate area for 20 camping spots, the land was offering simplified permits and even financial incentives for new campsite companies. The county had been aggressively pushing expansion of recreational tourism. Most crucially, local government policies actively supported, not only legally but also practically all we intended to do. "Here's the beautiful part," Megan said, pointing to a map. "Except for Frank's property, which has been the only thing separating Nancy's little realm from the outside world, commercially zoned land surrounds Pine Valley Estates. She's most likely been depending on finally gaining control over this territory, but if we act quickly, we can create a genuine business that would be grandfathered under present rules." We spent the rest of the afternoon working on a plan that would guarantee Nancy never saw our idea coming. Frank would sell the land to me via a private contract exempt from public announcement. Using many county departments, I would concurrently apply for all required business licenses and permissions. Megan would manage the legal documentation to guarantee proper filing of everything. The deal would be done and the permits would be approved by the time Nancy understood what was happening. Surprisingly simple were the financing arrangements. Frank was seeking a fair market price for agricultural land, far less than valuations for residential property. My savings and divorce settlement would cover the purchase cost. Business loans would help me pay for the campground building. More importantly, The expected income from a well-run RV campground would readily cover all costs and offer a good return on investment. We agreed to keep the whole project under wraps until all the paperwork was completed. Frank would carry on his regular schedule. I would seem to be thwarted in following Nancy's guidelines, and Megan would conduct all the legal work without any public filings that may alert Nancy. Presenting Nancy with a fait accompli, a fully approved, entirely legal recreational vehicle campsite directly next door to her priceless Pine Valley estates, was the aim. Nancy kept her daily monitoring schedule and celebrated her seeming triumph over my RV for the next 2 weeks, and we subtly crafted one of the most fulfilling vengeance schemes I have ever worked on. The camping idea excited county officials. Environmental investigations returned clean, and the applications for commercial licenses sailed across the approval procedure. Every possible legal contest was expected and handled. The only stressful moment occurred when Nancy allegedly began doing what she described as perimeter surveillance trips after noticing more activity near Frank's land. She would drive slowly beyond the property border, snapping pictures and attempting to understand what was going on. She once actually crossed Frank's territory in order to obtain closer-ups of survey stakes, which Frank recorded using her own camera system. The last item came together on a Thursday morning when I got word that the county had registered all authorized permits. Officially approved to start with full utilities, toilet facilities, and 20 recreational vehicle sites with electrical, water, and sewer hooking was Pine Valley RV Campground. The county had even granted our proposal for a big entry sign clearly seen from the major road. That evening, I sat in my living room staring across at Nancy's house, where she was carrying out her regular nighttime watch. I would show her the most shocking revelation of her unhappy life in less than 24 hours. Months of harassment, intimidation, and power abuse had Nancy Whitlow ready to learn sometimes the best retribution is serving it entirely lawfully and with right licenses. The Homeowners Association meeting on Tuesday night was scheduled as a regular monthly meeting, but I had ideas to make it unforgettable. Arriving 15 minutes late, I carried a manila folder and wore the largest smile I had achieved in months. Nancy was in the middle of showing her monthly neighborhood compliance report when I entered, and her expression of perplexity was wonderful. For weeks, I had been the defeated enemy, the damaged neighbor compelled to follow her absurd policies. Her rhythm was obviously thrown off by my unexpected presence carrying what seemed to be vital papers. Nancy kept flitting uncomfortably in my direction as I was speaking. Thanks for our careful application of accepted rules. Community standards remain high. She was practically shining with self-satisfaction as she detailed her triumph over my RV, totally ignorant that her world was about to change drastically. The recreational vehicle situation has been resolved, and we have successfully maintained the aesthetic integrity that makes Pine Valley Estates unique. I got up and moved to the front of the room as Nancy ended her presentation and let fresh business flow. Setting my manila folder on the table and drawing out a big stack of official records, I remarked, "I have an announcement that I think everyone will find interesting." I wanted to personally let my neighbors know about a new company launching just across from Pine Valley Estates. As I laid the licenses and permits across the table for everyone to view, the room went absolutely quiet. Nancy's countenance changed numerous times as I continued to announce the grand opening of Pine Valley RV Campground, a full-service recreational vehicle park on former Delaney property. 20 luxury RV sites with complete hooking, bathroom and shower amenities, laundry services, and fast wireless internet will be available here. This next Saturday is our grand opening. The room was so still that the air conditioning hummed clearly. Nancy opened and closed her mouth silently, staring at the permits as though they were written in a foreign tongue. She sputtered at last, "That's impossible. That land is not allocated for business usage." I nodded gently and gestured to the pertinent permit. Nancy grabbed the permits and began reading furiously, searching for some error or loophole that would invalidate what I had just said. Actually, property is zoned for recreational and agricultural use, which makes an RV campground not only permissible but encouraged by county development laws. Megan, however, had done her job exactly. Every paperwork was correctly submitted, every need satisfied, every possible criticism expected and answered. "This cannot be legal," Nancy yelled, her voice rising to a level that caused several individuals to grimace. "First thing tomorrow morning, I'm calling the county planning office." "Please do," I answered coolly. "They will be pleased to verify Pine Valley RV Campground is completely allowed and ready to start running." This last revelation, which was definitely true, appeared to drain whatever little color remained from Nancy's cheeks. The County Development Office is actually preparing to feature us in their leisure travel brochure. It was quite evident that government authorities were celebrating my camping, far more than her mind could handle under control-obsessed terms. Nancy insisted on emergency resolutions, special investigations, and quick legal action to stop what she kept calling this travesty, and the rest of the conference descended into anarchy. Her fellow board members, however, were more eager to find out about the possible advantages of a well-run campsite next than in bolstering Nancy's frenzy. Practical considerations, including noise levels, traffic patterns, and whether guests of a campground would have access to community facilities, were asked by several neighbors. Their tone was courteous and their worries were reasonable, a far cry from Nancy's increasingly hysterical demands for instant action. Saturday morning found ideal conditions for a spectacular opening. To display a large sign reading, "Pine Valley RV Camp Roundup, all RVs welcome," in brilliant red letters clearly seen from half a mile away, I had engaged a professional banner firm. Nancy would see the placard every time she gazed out her kitchen window, a regular reminder that her reign of neighborhood terror had at last found equal. The first customer of the campsite showed up exactly at 9 a.m. driving a 35-foot motorhome nearly exactly like my forbidden RV. An Arizona retired couple showed up. The facilities, the location, and most importantly, the low nightly rates delighted them. Nancy was watching from her front window with binoculars, recording the arrival of the very type of vehicle she would have spent months attempting to eradicate from her site as I helped them link to utilities. 12 of our 20 sites were occupied by lunchtime, and people were phoning to schedule for the next weekend. Word of our neat facilities, pleasant service, and handy location was rapidly getting across RV traveler networks. Retirees traveling the nation, families on vacation, and weekend explorers seeking a quiet location to park their rigs were among the guests. Exactly the kind of conscientious, well-adjusted folks I had hoped to draw. Nancy's reaction to our victory was inevitably theatrical. She planned a "Save Our Neighborhood" demonstration whereby she and one perplexed neighbor displayed homemade signs on the pavement outside our door. Made with magic markers and poster board, her signs said, "Stop the Invasion" and "Protect Pine Valley." She had somehow persuaded herself that local media would be interested in reporting her one-woman demonstration. The demonstration peaked in ridiculousness when Nancy tried to execute a citizen's arrest on our third client, an old Oklahoma man just attempting to park his travel trailer. Announcing that he was trespassing in a residential area, she marched up to his window and insisted he turn himself in pending police arrival. The poor man was so disoriented that he began grabbing for his cell phone to seek for aid, which set Nancy on yelling about opposition to an arrest. Luckily, Deputy Whitman showed up at that point for his regular campground wellness check. Every morning, he would stop with his coffee, partially to make sure everything was functioning as it should and partly because our campground coffee seemed to be better than what they had at the police station. The look on Nancy's face as Deputy Whitman threatened to arrest her instead of my customers was absolutely priceless. "Ma'am," he said to Nancy in the patient tone of someone who had dealt with her many times before, "you can't arrest people for legally using a permitted business, and if you don't stop harassing our customers, I'm going to have to arrest you for disturbing the peace." Her whole perspective seemed to fall apart when she discovered that the law enforcement agent she had been calling daily for months was now defending the very people she wanted eliminated. She remained there fuming for a few seconds, then gathered her protest placards and ran back to her house mumbling threats about attorneys, litigation, and combat of this injustice all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. I watched families gather around campfires and retirees savoring the quiet evening as the sun sank on our first day of business from close to our entry sign. I felt a delight I hadn't expected when I saw contented individuals lounging in their RVs, doing exactly what Nancy had urged against. This was justice, not only retribution now. Nancy had misused her authority to make my life miserable, and today she was learning that deeds have results. From where I stood close to the door, I could see Nancy silhouetted in her kitchen window, clearly organizing her next action in what she most likely felt to be a winnable conflict. But Nancy had already lost. She simply didn't know it yet, as I gazed around at our busy campsite, happy patrons, and entirely legal operation. Delivered as a lawsuit filed by the most expensive law firm in the county, Nancy's retaliation came exactly 1 week following our grand opening. Claiming that Pine Valley RV Campground constituted a public nuisance, permanently damaged residential property values, and violated many zoning rules the lawyers had seemingly created on the fly, the lawsuit was a masterwork of legal desperation. Nancy was looking for damages for what she believed to be degradation of local character in addition to an instant injunction to stop our business. The local newspaper picked up the tale, and suddenly our small neighborhood conflict attracted public interest. The title, "Local Woman Sues Over RV Campground," featured a picture of Nancy with one of her homemade protest banners along with the paper fairly portrayed both sides of the tale, but the comment section was largely positive of the campground. New leisure facilities in the region were much welcomed, and Nancy's reputation for neighborhood harassment seems to have preceded her into the public domain. The lawsuit delighted Megan, and it surprised me until she clarified her approach. She replied, arranging Nancy's legal documents across her conference table, "Cal, this is exactly what we wanted. Nancy has subjected herself to discovery by launching this action. Hence, as HOA president, we can review all of her records, correspondence, and financial activities." The investigation turned out exactly what Megan had suspected. Nancy had been methodically embezzling money from the Pine Valley Estates Homeowners Association Fund for over 2 years. Based on what I have already found in public records, Nancy seems to have been quite foolish with other people's money. The proof was astonishingly messy and overpowering. Claiming her car was utilized for official HOA business, she had paid her personal attorney bills with HOA money, reimbursed herself for fictitious community improvement expenses, and even paid her monthly car payments. She had taken around $15,000 overall from a maintenance fund of her neighbors. But what we found went much beyond the embezzlement. Nancy's records turned up a pattern of harassment considerably beyond what she had done to me. Over the preceding 3 years, she had targeted at least 6 different neighbors, filed bogus complaints, made pointless police reports, and intimidated anyone who disagreed with her using her HOA position. She had even maintained thorough records on every one of her targets, including pictures, notes on surveillance, and apparently psychological profiles. Nancy's own computer, which had hundreds of emails between her and her attorney on tactics for removing unwelcome components from Pine Valley Estates, was the most damning source. Nancy had wrote in one especially damning note, "I don't care if it's legal or not, I want that RV owner gone by whatever means necessary." Her attorney had advised how to creatively interpret HOA rules to reach her objectives. Something fascinating occurred as word of the lawsuit traveled around the community. People began approaching with personal Nancy horror tales. Everyone had a Nancy story, but none of them were positive. The woman who had been reported for having non-conforming garden gnomes, the family who had been harassed for parking their teenage car in their own driveway, the elderly man who had been fined for having his newspaper delivered too early in the morning, everyone had a Nancy story. Standing room only was the Emergency Homeowners Association meeting scheduled to handle the lawsuit. Arriving with her attorney and a briefcase full of records, Nancy obviously intended to show her case to a supportive audience of neighbors who also expressed indignation over the campground. Rather, she encountered a room full of individuals waiting years for someone to at last question her abuse of authority. Nancy gave a 90-minute PowerPoint extravaganza called "Saving Pine Valley Estates from Commercial Invasion." She had data demonstrating claimed losses in property value, pictures of RV damage to neighborhood aesthetics, and even a thorough study of changing traffic patterns. Her attorney nodded favorably as she presented what they obviously considered to be an airtight case for closing the campground and gathering significant damages. The room erupted when Nancy concluded her lecture and sought questions. But Nancy was subjected to a storm of charges about her own behavior rather than the expected supportive indignation. Neighbors insisted on knowing why her personal legal bills were paid for using HOA money. People sought answers for the enigmatic community improvement costs never seen before. Several neighbors sent documents of harassment allegations they had leveled against Nancy that the HOA board had disregarded. The turning point in the conference occurred when Megan got up and coolly asked permission to answer Nancy's accusations. She gave a quick summary of what research had turned up: the embezzlement, the harassment records, the abuse of authority, and the methodical intimidation of anyone who disagreed with Nancy's progressively dictatorial leadership style. As Megan showed bank documents proving exactly how Nancy had been pilfering from her neighbors' trust money, the room grew absolutely quiet. Nancy responded with a total collapse that ruined any credibility she still had. She began yelling about conspiracies, outside activists, and those who lacked the knowledge necessary to uphold community norms. She said Megan was involved in some sort of legal plot, accused me of bribing county authorities, and even hinted that her other HOA board members were being blackmailed into opposition. Nancy made things worse for herself the more she talked. She said she used HOA money for personal needs, explained her monitoring actions as required security precautions, and justified her harassment efforts as preservation of property values. Nancy had basically admitted to every charge against her and alienated everyone who may have helped her by the time security officers had to accompany her out the building. There was a unanimous decision to take Nancy from her HOA post. The vote to choose me as the new president was almost exactly decisive. Eliminating every one of Nancy's artistic interpretations of the original Homeowners Association covenant, my first official act brought Pine Valley Estates back to the acceptable community standards that had before Nancy's reign of terror. 6 months later, Pine Valley RV Campground is booked entirely for next summer. 3 other RV travel magazines have covered us, and the county has asked us to be a model for other projects including leisure travel. In order to pay back the money she had pilfered plus legal expenses and fines, Nancy had to sell her residence. She moved to Florida, but Frank told me she already had issues with her new homeowners association down there. I get my coffee on the front porch of the campsite every morning and watch content families begin their day in their RVs parked precisely where Nancy formerly worked so hard to forbid. Under a new neighborhood sign saying, Pine Valley Estates, community, not control, my own RV sits boldly in my driveway. Sometimes for coffee and to let me know how much quieter his work has become since Nancy moved away, Deputy Whitman swings by. Sometimes I consider what might have occurred if Nancy had simply minded her own business and permitted me to peacefully park my RV. I would have stayed silent in Pine Valley Estates, gone weekend camping, and bothered no one. Nancy's harassment, however, taught me something crucial. Bullies only have as much power as we grant them, and perhaps the best reaction to misuse of authority is to entirely remove that authority. In retrospect, I almost owe Nancy Whitlow thanks. Her harassment campaign failed so brilliantly that she found herself producing exactly the reverse of what she had intended. Rather of removing RVs from her view, she made me create a business where every single day dozens of RVs are just outside her former kitchen window. She lost everything and had to leave town in disgrace instead of keeping hold of neighborhood influence. And rather than make my life miserable, she unintentionally helped me create something I really am proud of. The lesson here is straightforward. Create a better system instead of merely rebuffing someone using institutional authority to intimidate you inside their system. Nancy wanted to govern everything she could see from her window, but today everyone can see what actual freedom looks like and they are paying for the pleasure. Sometimes the best kind of retribution is winning so totally that your opponent is forced to submit. It is not getting even. For traveling the emotional roller coaster with HOA Journal, thank you. Fasten yourselves. The following one's much more twisted.